It is possible to get yourself out of any and all circumstances, and I'm going to prove that to you. Back in 2016, I was in a highly abusive relationship. I was working a job that I absolutely hated, and I was addicted to many substances that I was clinging on to as a lifeline. The guy that I was dating at the time, we had been on again, off again for a few years at this point. We had previously lived together. This was now our second time living together, and I was so disconnected from myself at that point in life that I was basically just a shell of a human being. I didn't actually know that I was in an abusive relationship at the time until this particular night where it became very evident to me that I needed to make some new choices. Every night, I would never know what version of my ex was going to walk through the front door after work. And so as soon as I got home from work, I would either start in on a 6-pack or crack a bottle of wine. I would always roll a blunt. I was also addicted to chewing tobacco back then. I would just ingest whatever substances I could in order to completely numb out from the life that I had somehow found myself inside of. But essentially, I had no idea what version of my ex at the time was going to walk in through the door, and so I would just get real blackout-like in order to deal with whatever I was going to get. I could always tell by the way in which my ex was entering the front door what version of him was going to be presented to me that evening. On this particular night, I could tell immediately. As soon as the storm door opened and slammed against the railing on the porch, I knew that I was in for quite a night. This person was very verbally abusive towards me, and on occasion, things would get physical, but not quite like this particular night. Things went much further than I had ever experienced before. Not to go into too much detail, because I'm not trying to traumatize anybody, especially if you have been in this experience. You don't need to relive your own past while I share this story. I just remember he was just screaming in my face and telling me all of these horrible things about myself, and basically telling me I'm never going to become anything, I'm never going to make anything of myself. Just anything that he could possibly think of to hurt my feelings, he was screaming it at me. And then on top of all the physicalities that were taking place, there came a point in which, while he was screaming in my face, it was as if my conscious awareness was watching everything that was happening between the two of us from the other side of the room, like up in the ceiling, watching from like a bird's eye view. I could see my own body, and I could see him standing there screaming at me, but my consciousness was no longer in my body. It was completely disassociated and just on the other side of the room. As he's screaming in my face and just saying all these horrible things to me, I'm having this epiphany and realization that, holy shit, I'm in an abusive relationship. His and my dynamic was mimicking the dynamic I had with my mother and 4-year-old me. And so he's screaming in my face, and it instantly brought me back to my childhood. And just a quick trigger warning: if you dealt with either of your parents or caregivers or anyone like that that was abusive towards you, specifically verbal, you may want to skip ahead a few seconds, 20 seconds or so. But essentially, my mother, when I was a child, told me on a consistent daily basis that she was going to effing kill me. And now, being a small child, I believed her. I had absolutely zero self-worth back then. I did not have a single cell in my body that felt like I deserved anything outside of what I was experiencing back in 2016. And that was because of my upbringing. This night was a massive turning point in my life, and just realizing the level of danger that I was actually in. I was genuinely terrified for my life. I didn't know if I was actually going to make it out of that house alive. And so after having this realization, I'm trying to collect myself and just basically remove myself from the dining room where he was screaming in my face. And the whole night, I'm basically just trying to get away from this guy. And so there did come a point where I went to grab my jacket and my purse, and I was literally getting my jacket on, and he had said to me, if you leave, if you walk out that door right now, we are done. I'm leaving the state, and I'm never talking to you again. I'm sharing these details so that you understand the level of codependency that I was very much operating out of back at that point in time. And I was very much terrified for my life. I was isolated from all of my family and friends to the point where I didn't have anyone to talk to. Because I was so scared, I just slowly took my jacket back off, put it back in the closet, set my purse down, and then just quietly sat in the corner of the living room until he eventually went to bed. And then I still waited another hour before I went into the bedroom to also go to sleep. And so I thought it was safe. By the time I went into the bedroom to go to sleep, he flipped the light on and then starts back at it again. And yeah, it was quite a night. And so I didn't even get any sleep that night. I ended up just laying in bed, questioning all of my choices, because I've always been somebody that's done my best to be a good person. I'm not out here trying to fuck people over. And so I'm thinking in my head, what choices have I made to get into this situation? I didn't end up sleeping at all that night. I stayed lying awake. I ended up getting up at 4 a.m. and I literally went straight to work, and I sat in the parking lot for hours waiting for work to start. And so I clocked in, went to work, it was just another day. However, after that particular night, every single day after work, even though I already was very much an alcoholic, I was addicted to chewing tobacco, all of which I'm going to be going into much further detail in a different video in the future. As soon as I left work, every day after that point, I would ingest all the substances and basically just get to a state of blacking out and just numbing out and completely not existing in my human body. This went on for a while because, again, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't know how to even get myself out of this situation. I just knew that I needed to get out. At this point, between this particular night happening and then me actually leaving, months went by, and I would get blackout drunk every night, like I said, and I remember not being able to physically look at myself in the mirror because I was so disappointed in myself. I was so upset that I had allowed myself to not only get myself into this type of relationship, but to even allow myself to work the job that I was working because I knew that I hated it. I used to upholster at a furniture factory for a couple of years, and I would spend every moment of my life in that building screaming in my head, asking why I was there. And so all of this stuff combined for these few months, I could not physically look at myself in the eyes. I could not make eye contact with myself because I was so genuinely disappointed in myself. And I couldn't face myself. One day I was leaving work, just as any normal day, I'm racing to get home to crack a bottle of wine, roll a blunt, and just get fucked up. And there was a little bit of a dusting of snow on the roads, and I drove a little Ford Ranger at the time, and I didn't bother turning on the four-wheel drive because I thought, it's just a dusting, it's not that big of a deal. So I leave work, I'm not even half a mile down the road, and I end up spinning out and hitting the embankment on the opposite side of the road from what I was driving. And as soon as the impact happened, the first thought that I had to myself was, did I finally die? The way the thought was formulated was as if that was what I was hoping for. As if all this time that was passing, all I wanted was to die. And I didn't even realize that I had gotten to that place within my life. On this moment of impact, hearing my own inner dialogue ask, did I finally die? It's when it dawned on me of, I need to make a change. This is not at all the life that I came here to live. And also, simultaneously, I have goosebumps everywhere. Once I registered what I had thought to myself, I finally drew my eyes up to look at myself in my rearview mirror for the first time in what felt like forever. I don't know how to express it other than that was the moment of my spiritual awakening. That was the moment that I realized I needed to make major changes or I was going to die. And then somehow, naturally, I'm not sure how it happened. I think it was because of the fact that I realized that I had that thought. From that moment forward, I started paying more attention to my thoughts, just naturally started to tune in more. And then that's when I would realize every day that I go to my job, most of the time I would just throw headphones in. I would listen to comedy podcasts because I was literally so depressed at that point that was the only thing that was essentially keeping me going while I was at work. And so I'd listen to these comedy podcasts, And then after this particular day, though, I would still listen to those, but I would actually spend intentional time not listen to podcasts, even though I would always put headphones in so people wouldn't talk to me. I would take these moments, these different parts of my day to tune into my thoughts. And I would ask myself periodically throughout the day, every day after that, what am I thinking about right now? And then I would recognize how much I absolutely hated my job. I would be screaming at the top of my lungs in my head, just why am I here? There's no way that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. What is the purpose of life? What is the purpose of me even being here? I would have all these questions, and I always had those questions. I just wasn't paying attention to them until I crashed my truck that day. Moving forward, I started to become a lot more present with myself, and it was a very eye-opening experience to recognize just how negatively I was talking down on myself, how much I was complaining to myself about my life, about my situation, about my relationship, about my job, about the fact that I was constantly numbing out with all these addictions. But after I started to pay more attention to my thoughts, it was only within a few days or maybe a week or two, I was scrolling through Facebook and I started to notice these articles that would come up that would be titled narcissists and sociopaths. And I was wondering, why does Facebook keep showing me these random articles? And I didn't know anything about narcissists or sociopaths. The only time I ever heard narcissist was in the context of somebody being obsessed with looking at themselves in the mirror. So I didn't know, anything about the actual personality disorder. And so essentially, as I'm reading these articles, I'm starting to connect the dots and recognizing that the things that I'm reading are very much expressing the types of people that I was dealing with in regards to my mother, in regards to my ex, and even other people in my life as well. I end up researching to find a book so I could understand these personality disorders on a more grounded, practical level so I could understand what to do and how to proceed forward. So I ended up coming across a book called When Love is a Lie. I don't remember anything about the book. I just remember reading the book from front to back in the matter of 3 evenings, and I'm just blowing through this book because every single word was resonating on such a visceral level. It was actually really scary because it then brought to my attention the gravity of the situation that I was in and the level of danger that I was actually in by staying in that relationship. For the next few months, I end up really taking it upon myself to essentially become mentally and emotionally detached from him in order to eventually, in March of 2017, have the courage to break up with him. And then at that point, I ended up moving back home with my dad. And I know not everybody has the opportunity to move back in with their parents as an adult, but thankfully I had that option, especially because, again, like I had mentioned earlier, I was completely isolated from all my family and friends at this point. I had nobody other than my dad to turn to. And so moving back at home ended up being a massive blessing for me. It was the starting point of a brand new chapter of my life where I finally started to get to know who I actually was, what my values were, and the things that I actually really wanted out of life. This whole entire experience ended up being the catalyst for me to finally embark on this spiritual journey, which it found me. I didn't find it, it found me. I happened to make a lot of really terrible choices and wound up on this path. And I am extremely grateful because I would not be the person I am today had I not gone through everything that I've gone through throughout my life. I learned a lot from that experience. And one of the things that I learned that really has stuck with me is the fact that hurt people hurt people. And I know that's a very common phrase and maybe it sounds cliche, but I believe that as individuals, it is our responsibility, even though we are not the ones that traumatized ourselves, it is our responsibility as adults to take accountability for the fact that we now have agency over ourselves and over our choices in our life and what we choose to do with it. I believe that as individuals, we all should be healing mentally and emotionally so that we aren't traumatizing everyone else around us, especially those of us that plan to have kids in the future, because what we don't heal and deal with, we just pass on to the future generations. Another thing that I learned is that you don't have to wait until you hit rock bottom in order to finally make a change. If you want to avoid hitting rock bottom, all you have to do is ask yourself, where will I be in a year from now if I continue to make the exact same choices that I'm making right now? And hopefully that's enough motivation to get you moving and at least starting to self-reflect and to maybe even journal and just start to pinpoint who you are, what your values are, and what you want out of life. Because once you understand those things, then you can start to move towards those, and you can start to let go of the things that don't align with that. Another thing I learned is that you do not have to have an entire PowerPoint presentation of tangible evidence as to why you are choosing to break up with somebody or remove someone from your life. I don't care if this is romantic, friendship, family, business, whatever. If somebody is treating you disrespectfully, you have every single right to remove yourself from that relationship, period. I don't care who it is. And you will learn as I share more of my story why I don't care about who the person is. I don't care who it is. If somebody is treating you like shit and they are in no way, shape, or form ever intending on changing their behavior, then you need to make a new choice because they're not going to change. And the final thing that I want to share as well that I've learned is that I essentially fell in love with a version of that guy that never existed. It was only in my head. I created this entire fantasy of who I thought he was, who I thought he could be, what I thought our relationship was going to be one day. And there was never any point throughout that entire relationship, which I was with him all together for 6 years, which we're going to get into more of that relationship in another video. However, I fell in love with a version of him that never existed. He used to future fake all the time, which is essentially creating these promises for the future that are just false promises because there's never action taken towards any of it. And so I would just eat up all those juicy little breadcrumbs that he would leave for me. And yeah, it made me realize that I was very much always the person that fell in love with the potential of people instead of taking them at face value, because people show you exactly who they are. And if people's words and actions aren't aligning, that's all you need to know. I'm extremely excited to share more of my story because I have gone through more stuff in my life than most people go through in their own lifetime, and I'm only 34. It is possible to get yourself out of any and all circumstances, and I'm going to prove that to you. Thank you so much for watching. If you resonated with any part of my story, please leave a comment down below. I would love to hear from you. And like I said, I'm going to be sharing a lot more about my story, and it's probably going to take me a few months. So if you would like to be a part of that and to hear more of my story, you can go ahead and subscribe. And if this is where we part ways, I wish you all the best, and hopefully I will see you in my next video. Bye!